My name is Jeremy Devins, and this is the Quiet Mind Astrology podcast. And today is a special episode about how I became a Vedic astrologer. So, this isn't something I've talked about before on the podcast, and I thought it'd be really interesting to share because tomorrow I'm hosting the free workshop called Become Your Own Astrologer at quietmind.yoga/astrology workshop. You can sign up right now. And if you're listening to this later, you can still go there and get to that workshop replay or get on the waiting list for whenever I do it in the future. quietmind.yoga/astrology workshops where you can check that out. So how did I get to this point of having an astrology podcast, giving readings, being an astrologer, and having that identity? Well, it was pretty reluctant, and for a long time, I was always very interested in astrology from a very young age, all the way back to when I was a kid and first heard about this stuff. I was very interested in all of this sort of secretive, mysterious, occult, hidden astrology, tarot, these kind of things. Whenever I would hear about them, my ears would perk up. I was very interested. And it was kind of hard to find that kind of information in like grade school and elementary school and things like that. So whenever I could find it, I was very excited. And my mom and my stepdad would talk about this occasionally or things like this. And those are just like my favorite times of my childhood, just like listening to them talk about mysterious things and all sorts of stuff like aliens, ghosts. Like they were interested in all of that, which I really just got more interested in things. I'm pretty practical in nature. So like, what can we prove and be tangible about? So I went more in that direction, but all of that stuff just fascinated me. And I didn't actually have my real father, my biological father in my life. I didn't know him. I never met him. And went through a few different blood tests to try to find who it was and wasn't able to do that. So I always felt a little bit outside of the sort of mainstream bubble of experience. Moved a lot, was in poverty, tons of different schools. By the time I'm 35 now, if you didn't know, I'm 35 years old in 2021, and I've probably moved home at least 35 times. So just constantly moving. And a lot of that was before the last 2 or 3 years. So I've actually been in the same place now for 2 years, which is, I think, a record for me. It's one of the longest times I've stayed in one place since I've built up my businesses and everything. So I'm like, now I have a home base where I'm creating things. That feels really good. But through my childhood, it was just constant movement and change and volatility. Now, those of you who know some stuff about astrology, while I'm talking about this stuff, maybe you can pick up on some aspects that might be in my chart. And I'll get to why I'm saying that now in a little bit. But if you know a bit about astrology, and as you're listening to me talk, and really after a certain point when you get really into astrology, when you listen to anybody talk, you're thinking, do they have this placement? Sounds like they've got that one. So I will share about some of mine later when we get to that part of the story. But childhood was chaotic, a lot of change, a lot of drama, a lot of just being on the wild ride of the childhood, lots of moving. Didn't know my father. I was fortunate to have a stepdad in my life who was very influential and positive influence, a really good person who was there for a few years, 5 or 6 years, I think, my teens. It's an important time to have that. So I was really grateful for that. But I did lack the sort of guidance and relationship of like, what do I do? What are the answers to life? Why are we here? My mom would do her best, but she was constantly working. And I actually was home alone, babysitting myself a lot from a young age. So I feel like I had to grow up fast and be in solitude and quiet and alone a lot, which I think made me very skilled at doing things like meditation. And I never knew what meditation was at that time until like my late teens. But at that point, I had really spent a lot of time just kind of alone, staring into space, contemplating life, and not really going out. I lived in bad neighborhoods, so I didn't go outside. My mom didn't want me going outside, which is ultimately for the best. I did have friends get involved in gangs and terrible situations. So a lot of that kind of stuff I was able to avoid, fortunately. And being alone, it was lonely. I felt sad at times. But it did build this sort of comfort with being in stillness and quiet. And ultimately to, my whole business called Quiet Mind Yoga, it's about being comfortable with that relationship of quieting all the noises, the drama, and finding a still calm center. And I really kind of had to do that as a child. So I feel like it was a necessary part of my growth to get to where I am now and be able to help people in that way, with mindfulness, with meditation, with sort of navigating all these transits that we go through in life and in the world, which are by nature going to be chaotic and dramatic and intense. So that was my childhood, in a few words. And then in my teens, I was fortunate to go through a much more positive phase of life. So those of you know about dashas, I'll get to that too, because it's just kind of funny looking back on it. So went through a pretty positive phase of life, a lot of music. Got really into music. My stepdad, who was a positive influence, was a musician. He let me play his guitar and then got me a guitar. And I was very fortunate to bond with him in that way and connect through the sort of dark, mysterious things in life and guitar and music and like heavy metal and black metal and stuff like that, which is like very dark and intense. But it's ultimately pretty positive. It's actually creating a bonding experience, and I'm learning an instrument, learning a skill, and expressing myself through music. So it's very positive and very good. And even though some of that music is really dark and intense, you might be surprised to hear that, but I still really appreciate the musicianship that goes into that. It's incredibly complex stuff. So I really like that still, but I don't listen to it a whole lot. But that was a way that I connected with him and went through that phase of my life, which was more positive, and there was a bit more stability. There was still quite a bit of drama and chaos and intensity there. But ultimately, I started to go out on my own and actually moved out when I was 17. And we moved more and more. I ended up dropping out of school, just getting a GED and moving around. I was actually homeless for a little while when I was 17 and 18. Fortunate to have friends. I could stay on their couch, and really friendly, good friendships where their parents didn't care. Like, oh yeah, just come crash on our couch for a while. It's fine. So that whole transition there into 18 was really rough as well. And then it got really rough shortly after that, and there was a significant transit that happened there too. But all this time, I was really trying to look for meaning and answers and purpose, and I wasn't finding it in sort of the traditional things like religion necessarily. I appreciate religion, and I actually get really into Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism. Well, I didn't find Hinduism for a little later, but Taoism I really resonated with. So I was like looking to all these philosophical texts, spiritual texts, all these different sources of information, and I kept coming back to astrology, but it just seems so complex and dense, and like I could never be an astrologer. I could never learn all of that. It's so much to it. So I started listening to one of the first astrology podcasts that existed. I think it's called This Week in Astrology. I think it still exists, actually. It's Western, so I've dropped away from it and I don't follow it. But that was going on in 2006 or so, 2005 or 6. That's when podcasts kind of became a thing. And there was this weekly astrology podcast. Hey, how did we get here? Well, 15 years ago, that's what I was listening to every week myself. And I loved it. And it gave me so much insight and perspective. And I was so grateful it existed. And I think I'm getting the dates right. Maybe it was later than 2006. I don't know. But somewhere around there, that's what I was really into. And it just sort of gave me this insight and like perspective of like how to navigate this chaotic mess that was my life at the time, of like, what is the purpose of all this? What is the meaning of this? Why am I here? Why is there so much of this drama and intensity? And I was going through a depression and just trying to make sense of it, and really trying to find my way. I was really focused on music, and I just had a job for money. I stocked shelves at a Home Depot for like way too long. So I was just doing a job for money and trying to make this music thing happen in the daytime, and really following my astrology and the Western astrology. I was living by everything I found in that, and all the guidance I could find through that and websites and this podcast. And it was helpful. It felt like it was giving me insight and meaning and purpose. And at a certain point, it started to feel like I was really sort of like grinding my gears or not making progress. Like with my music projects, my goal was to put out this album in a short period of time. It ended up taking about 6 times as long as I thought. So from like 2 months to 12 months, ended up taking 18 months to finish that first album. If you're really curious, you can look up Lifeless Satellites. That was the name of the album, or the band. That was really just me and my best friend at the time making music. So pretty moody, dark, acoustic, sort of a unique, moody music, I guess. It was very cathartic to make that, and very healing in a way to make that. But it was very much in tune and aligned, and a lot of my decisions were actually coming from, well, I'm an Aries sun and Cancer moon in Western astrology. And so I am an emotional person. That's why there's been so much emotion in my life, and this depression and all this stuff going on. And Libra rising in Western, and that was like, well, maybe that's why I'm getting so interested in like yoga and meditation and all this stuff around that time as well. And that's a whole other path, which I talk about in my other podcast. But I'm just going to focus on the astrology today. So I was following my charts, and I got this online chart reading that was like $50, and I was actually kind of afraid to go to an in-person one, and I just wanted to do this online one, and I found that helpful too. Is like it talked about some things that I was really surprised. Like, how did they know that? That was really good. It's very validating and helpful. But yeah, I was following this sort of guidance of Libra rising and Cancer moon and Aries sun, which was my signs. And I felt like things were just kind of getting stuck, and I was in this depressive state. And at a certain point, I just sort of put it down as like, okay, I'm not going to focus on this too much. I feel like maybe I'm giving it too much power or credence. And what I do know is I feel really good when I go to this yoga class. So I kept doing that, and I talk about that in my yoga work. But that going to that yoga class felt amazing. It's like, oh, I want to do that again. So I went as soon as I could again, and I started doing it every day. And then I wound up in a teacher training and becoming a teacher. But I didn't really think that was going to happen. It's just like, I'm going to be a musician, and this yoga thing is helping a lot. So I'm going to focus on that. And I'm just going to sort of follow my intuition. Instead of following this astrology thing so much, I'm just going to follow my intuition, trust my gut, and just kind of let that lead me, and focus on gratitude. That was a really important part of my process, starting gratitude journaling, and just focus on that. And I found that to be really helpful. It kind of lifted me up out of that depression and that dark place that I was living in, like physically dark place I was living in, and dark time, and shifted all my energy from, I have to be a musician, I've got to make it, I've got to have this career, and all this sort of pressure I was putting on myself, to just let it go and focus on following my intuition. I ended up making way more music, and it was way more fulfilling, way more expressive, and enjoying life a lot more from this intuitive place. But still, in the back of my mind, I was aware of this astrology, and checking in and seeing when the retrogrades happen and all that. And then my yoga journey led me to Austin, Texas. So I moved from Minneapolis area, Minnesota, to Austin, Texas, and that's where I still am now. And I found this teacher training, and as soon as I moved to Austin, I was like, well, part of the reason I moved here is because of the music community, the yoga community, spiritual community, organic local food, things like that. Weather, big difference from Minnesota. And the first yoga class I went to, I asked, like, where could I find a yoga teacher training? Because I love yoga, I want to learn more. And she pointed me to a studio called Yoga Yoga. I went to Yoga Yoga and went to their info session, the next one they had a few days later. And immediately they divided us up. So I go into this room like, all right, I'm going to learn yoga. This is great. Let's learn about this training if I want to do it. And within the first few minutes, they said, all right, everybody who's here for Kundalini yoga, go to this room. Everybody who's here for Hatha yoga, go to this room. And at that point, I didn't know what either of those words meant. And I just knew I liked yoga. And I knew also that I liked this old guy with a white beard and white hair who had talked for a couple minutes at the beginning. So I'm going to go to the room that he's in. And that turned out to be eventually my astrology mentor and teacher, and my yoga teacher and mentor. And he helped me go through this huge transformational journey over the next couple of years that if I would have just gone to the other room, everything would have been different. It's very interesting how that happens. So all that to say, I go through the Kundalini teacher training with him, and that's a whole other journey again. But somewhere in there, I actually still remember the moment where I went up to him and asked him about Vedic astrology, because I'd heard him mention it. And other people had raved about his reviews. Like, wow, I had a reading with him. It was amazing and so life-changing. So I asked him about it and, what's that like? And, and told him about my Western chart. He's like, oh yeah, it's different. And you're going to have different signs probably. But it was just like this moment of like reaching out to this person of like, I kind of want to go in this direction. And I think that's the direction to go. And it was intuitively kind of being pulled in that direction. So I refused the call. So I didn't just immediately go into a reading with him. And if you know about the hero's journey, there's always this refusal of the call. So whenever life kind of invites us forward of like everything saying, go this way, there's a part of us that says, that sounds great. I'm not going to do that. And then you don't do it. And then you just kind of stew on it for a while. So that's what I did. I think it was maybe another year before I actually got the reading with him. But the whole time I was like thinking about it all the time and I couldn't wait to do it. So then I finally did. And then this is the big sort of peak of my story here. So in that reading, obviously it was life-changing and very profound and helpful and very insightful, mind-blowing, and because it made sense of everything that happened before. So I talked about having a very difficult childhood. Well, those of you who know anything about the dashas and Rahu, I grew up in the Rahu dasha, which is pretty chaotic and intense. Things got better when I was in my Jupiter dasha. Jupiter dasha is not so bad. It's actually quite positive, and especially in my chart where it is, it's pretty good placement. Really good for health and getting into health, which I did at the time. That's when I really got into health. And it was like a big left turn from my whole family, which they're not as concerned about health, but I got like obsessed with it. And that was the Jupiter dasha in my 6th house, if you know what that means. But so then I had a really rough turning point again in my life, which actually brushed over this, but there was a point in 2008 when I got robbed and everything was taken away. And that was a really important experience for me because for the whole 6 months before it happened, I would visualize it happening over and over and over again. And I would leave my apartment to go to work and visualize that happening. And then eventually one day I came home and it happened. And at that point, I realized that I was going to be a lot more intentional about what I visualized and put my attention and energy on in my life. And I was. And that was part of that. Okay, I'm going to be really intentional here. I'm not going to focus on, well, I have Cancer moon, so that must mean I'm depressed forever. I'm going to be depressed, right? And even if you do have Cancer moon in Vedic, like, it doesn't mean that. Even if you have moon in Scorpio, which is considered debilitated, big deal, right? I have Mercury debilitated, and here I am talking my head off to you. So all of those sort of obstacles or beliefs or negative beliefs we might have about astrology, sometimes there is a reason that they're there. There are challenges, yes, and we don't need to feed the negativity or believe that we're incapable of making choice. We always have free will. So anyway, in this reading with my teacher, he was going through these phases of my life, and yeah, there's loss of father here, disconnection from the family, career working mostly with women, which is what I ended up in, big focus on health, very good health, which I'm fortunate to have. So it's all there. It was all laid out in my chart. And that point where I got robbed was right when I started my Saturn Mahadasha. If you know what's after Jupiter, it's Saturn. And I'm still in the Saturn Dasha now. It's a long one. It feels like lifetime since it started. So those of you who are going into it, don't be afraid. Saturn is about fear, so you can be afraid if you want. If you want, I'm not going to tell you how to feel, but this idea that it needs to be feared or that it has to be bad is not necessarily the case. The truth is, as a teenager, I stole things, and it's not something I'm proud of, but it's something that happened. And I grew up in an environment where that was the norm and normalized, and I participated in that. And I felt when that happened, when I came home and everything was taken away, at that point, I not only did I make the decision to be very intentional about my focus, I felt like it was karmically a closing of that cycle. And I decided in that moment I would never steal anything again. And I can proudly say I haven't. And unless there's something I accidentally walked out of a store with once, I did that when I was a kid. And it's kind of turned my world upside down. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't pay for that, and I just walked out. What happened? Uh, so unless that's happened, I've been very intentional about that, and it that whole scarcity mindset it was coming from as a teenager and youth was vanquished, and I live in a much more positive, abundant mindset now, and trust that I'll always be provided for, and I have been, and much less fear, scarcity, needing to take to get, and instead focusing on giving to focus just on giving for the joy of it. So I felt like that was that turning point where it's like the universe said, okay, well, if you're going to keep stealing things, you're going to get stolen from too. So if you want to keep experiencing this, keep doing what you've been doing. And I think the universe gives us lessons like that a lot. So if you want to keep doing or you want to get this result, keep doing what you've been doing. If you want to get a different result, you got to change some things. And I definitely changed some things and became much more in integrity, much more honest, and much more intentional in my life at that point. Much more disciplined, as happens with the Saturn Dasha, and much more dedicated to spiritual practices and meditation. And in that time now, I've been in the Saturn Dasha. I've had so many periods of like my Kundalini training. You do like a 30-day sadhana every day. You do the same thing. Get up at 4:30 a.m. every day. Do this meditation practice for 2.5 hours. I went on to lead those after my training for a few years. 4:30 a.m. Not always every day, but many times. It's 4:30 a.m. 2.5 hour practice, and so many other daily practices along the way. It's changed a lot. I don't stick with just one thing all the time, but I've often got some sort of very disciplined, rigorous practice going on since then. So that's just for you in the Saturn Mahadasha, having some sort of practice. And I've done a ton of service work and volunteer work and donation. And that is also, it's not like I feel like I have to, or I'm paying off Saturn or something. That's all come from just desire and like wanting to serve. And I think that gets awoken in us during the Saturn Dasha. So that was happening for me. And in this reading again, so everything was validated. It all made sense. Now, all of that suffering was for a bigger purpose. And I think one of the most difficult things in life is to experience suffering that seems like it is completely meaningless and for no reason. It's like, why did that happen to me? Those kind of experiences. And you might be in that place, and I can understand that. And I'm not saying that because I'm sharing my experience that it invalidates yours in any way. But for me, in my experience, it felt like it gave all of that difficulty and struggle a sense of meaning. Another thing I forgot to mention is I had terrible teeth, like cavities everywhere. There's so many fillings. There's 2 bridges in my mouth right now. I've had worked on almost every tooth in my mouth, and that is a Saturn thing as well, sort of the foundational part of us. There's other aspects for that, but that was all taken care of in the Saturn Dasha as well, where I finished all those procedures, and now I can actually smile. I actually didn't smile. I would always hide my face when I smiled as a teenager, which didn't help the depression at all, as you can imagine. So to be able to smile openly without hiding my face at this point in my life is huge progress to me. I became a much happier person when I was able to just freely smile in public without feeling ashamed of my teeth. So Saturn sort of kicked me into gear of like, I've got to address this. I'm going to take care of this. I'm not going to do this anymore in my life. So these transits are big turning points, and that was laid out in my chart. And there was so much more. I could just talk about it. That one reading for much longer, but you get the idea. It was life changing and validating. It made sense of everything. And obviously, as I talk about it, I'm just like raving. And I was like, I want to learn everything I can about this. This is amazing. This is like, everything makes sense now. There's a meaning, there's a purpose. I can see why it happened. And that's what I started to do. I started to learn as much as I could and study with that teacher and with books, with online. At that point, there was starting to be more things, YouTube channels, books, everything I could find. I was voraciously consuming Vedic astrology information. And that's just what I did for a few years while focusing on teaching yoga and other work and my own practices, my own personal growth, but never, ever thinking I could be an astrologer. It's just like, I find these different resources. I'll learn from those. And, had to let go of my Western astrology guides and people I listened to and sources, and because it just didn't resonate anymore. And the more I did yoga and meditation, the more this Vedic path resonated. And so if you can do the math, it's still a sun in Aries, but now Gemini in the moon and Virgo in the rising sign. I think I should be able to say that faster. Sometimes I have to kind of visualize my chart. So yeah, it's sun in Aries. If you're curious what my info is, there it is. It's moon in Gemini and Virgo rising. So that was a change, especially the Virgo rising. I was like, oh, it's one of those that's like, that's so serious and so critical and cynical. I didn't want to own those parts of myself at the time. So I was criticizing the fact that anyone could think that I'm critical, but it's very much true. And as I looked at my life and like what I was actually doing with my time, it's like, I'm spending all my time on all these details and organizing things. And I love lists and practicality and a lot of time alone. I'm not spending all my time balancing out relationship dynamics and considering what everybody involved is going to find fair and valuable. It's like, what is logical? What is practical? I love it. That's more my style. So again, that's not saying it's the right way to be a Virgo or the best Virgo qualities in the world or whatever. It's just what I realized in myself was true. And just taking a look at it and trying to be the sort of like scientist of, if I take away the sort of trying to validate confirmation bias of like, how can I prove that I am a Virgo? Because it says it in my chart. But to actually just observe, like, what do I do with my time? What have I done? One of my earliest memories, you want to know what a Virgo rising is like as a child? This brought me so much joy when I was like 3 or 4 years old. I was left alone at this kid's house, this like friend, and I didn't have a lot of toys, had all this chaos going on, but this kid had all the toys. And it was like being in the toy store, but everything was bought. Like I could just play with all of the toys, all I want. And I was just left like a kid in the candy shop or a kid in a toy store in this room, but it was messy. So what did the Virgo child do? I was so thrilled for them to come home and be amazed at how clean and organized this room was. I didn't play with a single toy. I organized that room spotless. And all I could imagine the whole time was just wait till I see the look on my mom's face when she sees how clean this kid's room is. And yes, she had a look on her face. She was like, what did you do? Why did you clean everything? And that was kind of a through line throughout my life. And like when I been in situations where like somebody's coming home and I'm in that house, like it's one of my favorite things to do still. Like, how can I surprise them with how clean and organized everything is? So that's Virgo childhood, right? It's a little different than a Libra childhood. So that's, I just kind of looked back through my history. It's like, oh my gosh, it just validates so much. So that's why I became so obsessed with Vedic astrology and like, how do I learn how to do this? And so I was reading all these books and taking all these notes and trying to figure it out. And ultimately, I had to figure out like how to organize it in a way that made sense to my brain so that I could make use of it. Like I would ask my friends for their info and then look at the chart and be like, I don't know what to tell you. I know that's Virgo. I know that's Aries. I know that's the Jupiter. Okay. Uh, so what does it mean? And I would just kind of stare at the chart and not really know what to say about it. So I would get kind of frozen and be on the spot. And they're like eagerly excited because I'm like telling them how much I love astrology. And they're like, what does it say? What does it say? And I'm like, well, I'm going to need some time to research it and look at it. It's like, I don't know yet. And then I would maybe get back to them a couple of days later with like some things I looked up or some things, the notes I took in a book or, but really I just lacked this sort of confidence to really call myself an astrologer or be an astrologist. Like I could never, like, that's not me. That's people who are like doing this forever. Like my teacher had been doing it for many, many years. And, that's eventually I'll get there. It's like at some point I've got to just call myself an astrologer and be doing astrology. Just like a doctor doesn't necessarily call themselves like the world's expert doctor. They practice medicine. So I needed to start practicing astrology and just giving readings. So I started doing that more intentionally, of like actually giving people readings and like friends and close people of like, okay, this is what I see, and jumble some stuff together and hope it makes sense. Is that true? Is that true? And then start to pick up on the patterns, and then over time start to get more confident. Like, oh yeah, I've seen that. I know how to talk about that. And then over time, eventually I've seen a lot of things I could possibly see in the chart. So as soon as I pull it up, I know what to say. And then eventually more and more and more and more. And it just keeps building like that. But at some point, I just had to start and just say, okay, I'm an astrologer. It's like, not, I'm going to be an astrologer. I want to be an astrologer. It's just like, that's what I am. I'm an astrologer. So therefore, my actions need to be those of an astrologer. And there is like a quantum physics sort of neuro sort of brain. That's the word I'm looking for here. I'll get to it in a minute. But there's a part of our brains that is actually looking for what we are, what we identify with. If I say that I am a meditator, I'm going to behave differently than somebody who says I want to meditate. This is something I tell my meditation students all the time. It's much better to call yourself a meditator and just sit down and breathe for one breath than to say, oh, I tried to meditate, but I don't have time. It's like, I want to meditate. I need to do it for 10 minutes. It's like, then you're never a meditator. But if you say, I'm a meditator and I'm going to take a breath in meditation right now, and you do it, feels good. And there, you are a meditator. And the same thing with anything, I think. As a yoga teacher, when I do my yoga teacher trainings, I have them start teaching right away, the first week. So you're a yoga teacher right now. And the same thing in my astrology mentorship. You start giving readings and analyzing charts right away. So you're an astrologer as soon as you sign up. As soon as you make the choice to call yourself an astrologer. And our experience matches our beliefs. Just like when I would constantly visualize this apartment that I lived in at the time being robbed, my experience eventually matched my beliefs. Now, you don't have to agree with that. It's okay. If you think that's just woo-woo, that's fine. But we do know from quantum physics that everything is basically potentiality. 99.9999% empty space. And if we look at it expecting to see a particle, we'll see a particle. If we look at it expecting to see a wave, we'll see a wave. If we look at our lives expecting validation that we are an astrologer, that you are an astrologer, then you will find proof and you will create proof. Just like when I was in my depression and I chose to focus all my attention on what am I grateful for that day, all my energy went from why is life so difficult? Why am I stuck in this position? To what are the 3 things I'm going to put on my gratitude list tonight? And then I'm going to find something to be grateful for. I'm going to go do something that I'm afraid of, or ask somebody to go hang out or make something, or, just got to find something to add to that gratitude list. So same thing as an astrologer. You got to find reasons to prove that you are an astrologer. When you say it, it's like, I'm an astrologer. It's like, well, I've never given any readings. Well, try to give a reading. Well, I'm a novice astrologer then if I can't give a reading really well. But eventually you might become more experienced. If you keep doing it, you definitely will become more experienced and skillful. So we got to start somewhere. And that was the turning point for me. So getting the reading, validating my life experience, making sense of it all, and being amazed that this person could see into my soul and read my mind. And then wondering how he did it, and then doing everything I could to learn how, and then eventually starting to share it with others, and sort of putting myself into the position of like asking people for their birth info, and then putting on the spot of like, all right, I gotta say something about this now, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, so I gotta look it up, and then look those things up enough, then I know what they mean. And so what I've done in my mentorship program that I offer is I've just given you all of that. So it saves you a lot of time. So it's all listed out there. But that's basically what I wished existed. So that's what I created now. But tomorrow in the free workshop, I'm going to go into 7 of those very important things. So 7 steps to become your own astrologer and start doing these things for yourself. So learning how to cut down on all that time. It took me years to figure out. Save you a lot of years of confusion and frustration of trying to figure these things out. And I'll give you paths so you can go down your own path, self-taught, and figure things out as you go. And I'll show you the resources to look into. Or you can work with me, and I'll talk about that in the mentorship and on the free workshop tomorrow. So either way, I'll give you ways that you can go further in your studies. You can keep listening to the free podcast every week. You can study different books, work with other teachers. Ultimately, if this is the path you want to be on, you're going to go down the path, and I'm going to help you know what to look for, what to avoid, and what to focus on in the workshop. But I won't have time to tell you my whole life story, so hopefully you found this interesting and helpful and gives you some perspective. But really, the big turning points for me were seeking out a teacher, finding that teacher and working with him, and then pursuing this path and just sort of putting myself out there and on the spot to have to find the answers by saying I am an astrologer, and I'm going to impress you now with my astrology skills that I actually don't have. So I've got to go look them up, and then maybe I'll come back and then I'll impress you with my astrology skills. But ultimately, it's like I want to share that experience because it was so profound and life-changing for me. And I could just imagine, I mean, if I didn't have that experience, I would be on a very, very different path in my life. And fortunately, with the yoga and meditation, probably still a very positive path. But the astrology gave so much insight and perspective, and it just eliminated about 90% of my confusion, overwhelm, worry, doubt. Because there were so many things I was like, what about this? What about that? Maybe I should be doing this. Maybe I should be doing that, especially in my early 20s. Those of you, we've all probably experienced that in the early 20s. So I was very fortunate to have this. I was looking up, all these things about like quarter life crisis. What do I do in my 20s? Where do I go? I didn't have a dad to tell me, and not everybody does anyway, but I didn't have a sense of that purpose. And you might find it in other ways. You might find it through astrology in some way, but I obviously did. And I found it extremely helpful through astrology and my mentor. And that's why I want to give back in that way. So I will tomorrow on the free workshop. And that's at quietmind.yoga/astrology workshop. And if you're listening to this later, still go there. You can still join the replay or get on the waiting list for the next time I do it in the future. And I hope you found this interesting and helpful. And I don't like to talk about myself so much, but I thought it might be interesting to gain perspective and kind of get to know the person behind these weekly horoscopes on the podcast and why I do this. Obviously, it's made a huge, profound impact on my life. And hopefully it's helping serve you in some way. And it really means the world to me. I get a lot of amazing messages from you and people around the world that appreciate the podcast. And that really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for that. And if you do find this helpful, leave a review in Apple Podcasts, share it with a friend, and join us for the workshop tomorrow. It's going to be awesome, super fun. We've got lots of people joining us live at quietmind.yoga/astrology workshop for Become Your Own Astrologer. All right, have a great rest of your day.